Well, this is a process that I commenced when I was first elected in 2011 of ensuring that those who have an affinity with Gibraltar in Madrid have an opportunity of hearing direct from me what the issues in Gibraltar are. Of course, today, in the context of the relationship with Spain and the European Union, all of that is largely dominated by the EU-UK treaty negotiations, but there are other issues always to discuss, in particular with trade unions, who are ideologically, of course, on the same side as my political party.
In your interview on Spanish television, the language used by the interviewers didn't seem to reflect the progress being made by Gibraltar in terms of goodwill and a more modern relationship with Spain. I mean, how difficult does that make a treaty? Because, we live in a bit of a bubble here in Gibraltar, our colleagues in La Línea across the frontier, but wider Spain, if those interviewers reflect those opinions, then it doesn't seem that much has changed.
Well, I wouldn't agree with you for a simple reason. I think you've got to break down what was happening in that interview. First of all, you've got someone like Javi Fortes, who is a very accomplished Spanish political journalist. He is seen as being on the liberal left. But of course, when he's interviewing me, what he brings is the most polemic question he can, as you do when you interview me, in order to get the answer from me that he wants his audience to have, which is the explanation of the issue. So, for example, if he were interviewing somebody who is right-wing, he would sound like a left-winger because he was putting those issues to them. If he was interviewing somebody who is left-wing, he would sound like a right-winger because he would be putting those issues to him. In the context of national politics in Spain, when he's interviewing me, he's bringing the most rancid opinions possible to the table to interview me and challenge me on those issues. The four who made up the interview panel beyond the host included one person who is well known to be Partido Popular, because he has actually been in the Senate as a Partido Popular representative, and that's Pablo Montesinos. And he had, in my view, a totally warped view of Gibraltar's waters case and of what Gibraltar is or should be. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. But if you look at the other three members of the panel, they asked me questions about the issues in the treaty. What is the final issue that's outstanding? They asked me an issue about whether the Junta de Andalucía would likely be more or less supportive than the Partido Popular nationally. And they asked me a strategic issue about Gibraltar and the United States changing relationship with the EU and the UK. So really, it wasn't the sort of interview that you might not expect. But I hope that in the future, if we do have a treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union in relation to Gibraltar, it will mean that Spain looks at us in a different way, or at least progressive Spain. One of the things I didn't have time to say in that interview, when Pablo was insisting that every Spaniard felt the same thing, actually was that Esquerra Republicana does not represent the same point of view. Junts per Catalunya does not represent the same point of view. Sumar doesn't represent the same point of view. Podemos doesn't represent the same point of view. Just there, you've got 25% of the Spanish electorate, even though some may be Catalans, but they're being told that they're Spanish. Bildu doesn't have the same point of view. El PNV, the Partido Nacionalista Vasco, doesn't have the same point of view. That's a vast majority of all of the parties, qua parties, represented in the Spanish parliament. PSOE is made up of people who don't believe that Gibraltar should be Spanish and some who do. And then, of course, you've got Partido Popular and Vox. So, it's not true to say that every Spaniard believes that Gibraltar should be Spanish. There are many Spaniards who are ideologically convinced that Gibraltar should not be Spanish, and not just from La Línea and the area around us.
Staying with that interview, you said that there couldn't be another agreement if Spain didn't comply with the first one, which is the tax treaty, which you said you would walk away from it if they didn't remove us from Spain's blacklist. So can you just tell us what's happening with that?
That's in the process. That's actually a process of removal, and that process has commenced.
We expected to be removed by this time?
We expected the process to start by this time. If the process hadn't started, we would have withdrawn from it already.
So we are being removed then?
So I understand.
Okay, Chief Minister, we call the policeman who has ignored the bridging measures at the frontier a rogue, but the PP has called for bridging measures at the frontier to be removed, while Vox has accused the Spanish government of illegal measures at the frontier. So he's putting a national spotlight on those bridging measures when there's no deadline for a treaty. Will that put further pressure on negotiations?
No.
Okay. You remain optimistic about a treaty being agreed. The question is when?
Well, the question is when, and the question is what treaty. But the thing that must not trump what treaty we get is when we get it. In other words, if you insist on doing things quickly, then you're going to leave a lot of what you might be able to achieve on the table. And I know that people want certainty, but they want the right sort of certainty. We have to negotiate the best possible treaty. If we start to say we must have a treaty by next month, or if we start to permit a rogue officer in Spain, Partido Popular and Vox, to make it imperative that we finish quickly because otherwise we might have the full application of the Schengen Border Code, or indeed if we allow the full application of the Schengen Border Code to determine that we must now finish the negotiation, that is to permit pressure on us to force us into accepting things which we might not want to accept. Look, a treaty is going to have to be a compromise anyway. It's not going to be a cession of sovereignty at all. Not one iota of sovereignty concession. But then again, successive Spanish foreign ministers have said that this is not a negotiation with them where sovereignty is on the table. Indeed, it's a negotiation between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and the European Union does not have a sovereignty claim on Gibraltar. But it will involve compromises, of course, between an EU way of doing things in respect of the movement of goods and immigration into the Schengen space, and a Gibraltar way of doing things currently in respect of the importation of goods and how we currently do just immigration into Gibraltar. So that has to happen. But that compromise must be the right compromise through negotiation and not through pressure that we allow a rogue officer, Partido Popular, Vox, or any time that we might impose on ourselves as being relevant, as pushing us into.
So are you confident, notwithstanding the pressure he intends to continue applying because he's challenging the issue in a Spanish court, are you confident that those bridging measures will remain until such time as a treaty is agreed?
The bridging measures were agreed by Spain and the United Kingdom when we started this process. If they are not maintained by Spain, they will not be maintained by us. Remember that the bridging measures move in two directions. This is not just a bridging measure which Spain extends to Gibraltar. It is a bridging measure that Gibraltar extends to Spanish individuals, Spanish residents, and all EU individuals, EU citizens who live in the European Union. So if they fall in one direction, they fall in the other direction, and they cause problems for people, usually, unfortunately, working people, which is the last thing a socialist party would want to do. And at a human level, when people want to come to Gibraltar to see their relatives or go to Spain to see their relatives, forget those of us who might wish to go to Spain to eat fried fish or do some shopping, or those who might wish to come to Gibraltar touristically. Think about the human issues of people not being able to see their families as often and as fluidly as they might like, or indeed the human issue that arises when people come to work in Gibraltar. Now, if there are individuals who want to undo the bridging measures for their own selfish, ideological, political purposes, they will undo them in one direction and the other. That will be negative for people. It will be bad for people and for the whole of the region. But even then, we won't allow that to put pressure on us. We won't allow that to force us to compromise on something where we might not otherwise have compromised. But compromise, that is to say, on how goods move and how people are able to flow. Never compromise or concede on sovereignty issues, which are not in any event, as Spanish foreign ministers since Mr. Dastis have said, never anyway on the table, because we wouldn't sit at a table on which anybody sought to negotiate our sovereignty, which is exclusively British and always will be.
Chief Minister, you touched on the American administration earlier on in this interview, and we've seen a real resurgence of the far right in Europe. We saw yesterday the German election results with the AfD gaining huge amounts of ground. And we've also seen the tremendous support from the American administration for those elections for the centre-right and the far-right parties there. And then we had Elon Musk tweeting or Xing his support for the Spanish far-right party Vox. He said Vox will win the next election. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the last time I checked, Mr. Musk was a social media influencer, a billionaire, a space entrepreneur. I went to California to ensure the government of Gibraltar bought one of his electric cars, but he isn't a soothsayer. He can't tell the future.
Does it not add pressure, do you think, though, coming from the American administration?
I think it is a complete and utter irrelevance and a sideshow.